I'm Charles J. Shields, and I'm Associate Director of the Great Lives program. I also happen to be a writer. I've just published a book called And So It Goes, Kurt Vonnegut, A Life. It was out last week. I'm proud to say it was reviewed in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, a few other papers. And I also taught high school English for a long time. So I enjoy teaching, and I enjoy talking about writing. This is something I learned sort of the hard way from, starting at 15 years old on a high school newspaper and eventually moving into freelance writing and teaching. So this is part of a series of 4 talks, and this one today is the 3 C's of writing. And I'm going to be defining these terms, clarity, cohesion, and cogency. So if they're a little bit unfamiliar to you, don't worry about it. You'll see some overlap, all right? You'll say, well, yeah, but, cogency has to do with being clear and direct, right? And we've got clarity as one of our things. That's okay. There is some overlap. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of redundancy. Good writing has certain traits, certain characteristics that are evident in all kinds of writing, mainly formal writing. But you'll see that being clear and having your stuff sort of hold together, and also having your writing be direct is very important and makes for good reading as well as good writing. All right, let's talk about, first of all, what's the writing job you have to do? Maybe you're going to have to write the next great American novel. I don't know. Maybe some of you are experimenting with fiction in here, and it's your ambition to write fiction. Well, you'll find that these tips that I give you apply to fiction as well as nonfiction, because your relationship with the reader in both is critical. And we'll be talking a little bit about that. So whether you're writing about Moby Dick, or whether you're writing the follow-up to Catcher in the Rye based on your adolescent experiences, or whether you're writing a business letter to a colleague, the traits that we're going to be talking about apply to all of them. Maybe you have to write a paper. Maybe you have to write a paper that explains a procedure, like nuclear fission made easy. It's a step-by-step kind of paper. Or maybe you have to argue your point of view. Here is part of an opinion piece that appeared in the New York Times just a couple of days ago. It's by a young woman who teaches at, I think it's New York University. And she's arguing for the possibility that maybe there's too much emphasis on sexual harassment, that it's cramping our style in the office and with collegiality. What she's saying here is in an excerpt, codes of sexual harassment imagine an entirely symmetrical universe where people are never outrageous, rude, awkward, excessive, or confused. Perhaps we should be worrying about different forms of hostility in our workplace. Maybe it's better to live and work with colorful or inappropriate comments with irreverence, wildness, incorrectness, and ease. So what she's arguing for is kind of turning down the heat in offices about our concern with sexual harassment. This is a follow-up op-ed piece in connection with all of the attention that's being given recently to Herman Cain and his campaign, what he did or he didn't say. The topic was, the title of her op-ed piece here was "In Favor of Dirty Jokes and Risque Remarks." Her mother, incidentally, her mother's in her, I think, early 60s. Her mother is a very well-known feminist and activist. Well, whatever the task is, these 3 goals are common to all good writing. It doesn't matter whether you're writing a memo, whether you're writing a report, whether you're writing a poem, whether you're writing a piece of fiction, even whether you're writing a letter to a friend. Good writing has these 3 goals at the minimum. It keeps the reader engaged. Stephen King once said, "I don't know how really good a writer I am, but I can tell you this, I can make you turn the page." And it's true. Once you start one of his novels, you fall into it. And you may put it down 400 pages later and say, predictable, but you read it, didn't you? And you carried through on it. Also, good writing flows from point to point, step to step, scene to scene. I'll be talking about the structure of writing in a little bit, and you'll find that all good writing is structured. It may be subtle, you don't really notice what the structure is, but believe me, the author of that piece has put some thought into the flow going from point 1 to 3, or do this, do this, do this, or scene to scene. And finally, good writing, this is common to all good writing, it provokes the reader into thinking. Now, what does that mean? It provokes the writer into thinking, provokes the reader, rather, into thinking. Well, you want a reaction. You want a reaction from a reader. You want them to say quietly to themselves, I see what she's saying, I don't agree, but I see your point. You want the reader to say, very moving, sad. You want the reader to say, huh, never thought about that, interesting. Or you want the reader to say, oh, I see, oh, that makes sense, yeah. But to get that quality of engagement, you've got to be a little provocative. Not in an aggressive way, but provocative in the sense that your reader feels somehow that his or her attention has been captured, or she's been asked questions. I sometimes give talks on Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. The first biography I ever wrote was Mockingbird, A Portrait of Harper Lee. And audiences will ask me, why does this book endure? I mean, why? We're leading in now into the 4th generation of people reading To Kill a Mockingbird. 2/3 of American public high schools include To Kill a Mockingbird as part of their curriculum. What is it about this story in the 1930s about a little girl and a wrongfully accused man and a guy down the street who will never come out of his house? Well, I say that To Kill a Mockingbird, like all pieces of literature, is provocative in that it forces you to ask questions of yourself. As you read To Kill a Mockingbird, you think to yourself, boy, could I have done what Atticus did? I mean, if the neighbors are saying, don't do this, or why you, Atticus? If the neighbors are saying, you know, people are making fun of your children at school. They say you're really on the wrong side of this. If your brother says to you, why you? I mean, out of all the cases, this isn't going to do your reputation any good, and it isn't going to do our family any good either. But as you read the book, it provokes you into thinking. And all pieces of writing should be, on some level, a little provocative. The worst thing a reader can say about your writing is, so what? Who cares? I mean, you just used up 3 minutes of my time, or maybe an hour, or maybe a week in reading your novel. And my feeling at the end of all this is, and so? Or as, young people say, your point? All right, so there should be some level of being provocative. There's some engagement. Kurt Vonnegut one time said he has eight rules of writing, but this one always jumped out at me. The other applies to character creation and things. But this is his first rule. Use the time of a total stranger in such a way that he or she will not feel the time was wasted. You are giving something to a stranger, and you may say, well, no, it's somebody who sits next to me in my office, or it's my students, or it's my attorney, or something like that. Think of them as a stranger. You're giving them little marks of paper on a page. You're giving them little black marks on a page. And somehow these are going to have to persuade them, or they're going to have to contradict their ideas, or they're going to make your case, or they're going to move them. And, at base, there are little marks on a piece of paper. And you've got to punch through that barrier to reach them. When you write, you're creating a relationship with the reader. For one quiet moment, hour, week, that person is paying attention to you. They're giving you all of their interest. Imagine if you were speaking to somebody out here on Campus Walk and you were trying to interest them in what you were saying. Well, you don't even have the advantage of watching your reader's body language. You don't have the advantage of watching their eye movements. So you've got to assume that they're being distracted, or they didn't quite get what you just said, or this is a concept that's unfamiliar to them. So you're creating a relationship with a reader, and keep that reader in mind as you continue to engage them. Let's start with the first C of writing, which is clarity. All right, and we'll define that. Clarity is just the quality of being clear. It's of being certain or definite. The quality of transparency or purity, right from the Oxford English Dictionary. Your first aim, your primary aim of any kind of writing is to be understood. If there's no understanding there, game over. You've lost. You've sort of forfeited this little challenge of engaging the reader if there's at least no level of understanding. What's the enemy of clarity? Here it is. Banish it, evildoer, confounder, obfuscator. The enemy of clarity is complex writing. Complex writing. And you know, I have to tell you, and this is, believe me, I'm not putting down a university or a college environment. I was certainly in college a long enough time and learned many important things. But I have to tell you that there is a respect given to writing in a college environment that's very, if the respect is given to writing that's challenging. The writing should demonstrate the level of expertise behind the writing. It should demonstrate the scholarship behind the writing. It should show that the person knows whereof he or she speaks. All right? And believe me, there is an important place for that. As a researcher and a nonfiction writer, I depend upon scholarship for all kinds of ideas and investigations I never could have done on my own. But in terms of reaching, general readership, in terms of reaching the mainstream, in terms of making yourself clear, I would leave the tone of academic writing and scholarship to the professionals. Just because this is in a university environment doesn't mean that you have to necessarily emulate the style that goes into journals or that belongs in textbooks. That's what you're reading probably quite a bit, but nevertheless, that's a developed art. Those people have honed their skills. What I'm talking about today is reaching the mainstream, about reading the average reader, reaching the average reader. Well, there's two symptoms of complex writing. Two symptoms that tend to make writing complex and difficult to understand. And you might think that it would be, word choice. Well, possibly, but we all have the internet available, and we can look up words, for heaven's sakes. No, it really isn't so much word choice. First of all, one symptom of complex writing is the dreadful passive voice, which I'll be talking about. Easy to cure. At first, difficult to recognize, but once you spot it, you'll see it all the time. And secondly, the clinging, dependent clause. We're talking about, you don't need to be a grammar expert. I'll show you examples. All right? Here's an example of the passive voice. It tends to sound cosmopolitan. It tends to sound sophisticated. It sounds like someone in Parliament, in a sense, giving a talk. It was determined by the committee that the report was inconclusive. There's a certain amount of authority in that, it was determined. We were invited by the instructor to attend the review session. Or, here's a sentence possibly from a textbook, the religion of the pagans was able to survive the onslaught of new ideas until the old gods were finally displaced by Christianity. Okay? This is an interesting sentence. One time, Walcott Gibbs, a literary critic back in the 50s and 60s, said of Time magazine, backwards run sentences till reels the mind. And this is a case sort of a backward sentence in that the real heft of it is at the end, which we'll be talking about in a minute. But the passive voice tends to be controlled by various forms of the to be verb. If you're falling into a voice that is was, were, had, been, would have been, those long conditional kind of constructions, what it does is it puts all of the action in the past. Everything has already happened as a result. It's sort of like writing as archaeology. It's talking about the past. You may say, well, isn't that what you're supposed to do in history? We're talking about the past. Actually, good history is vivid. Good history has immediacy. Good history makes you feel like things are unfolding. People are drawing their swords. People are climbing on their horses. People are storming the barricades. It's not the Crusades were an event, or they did rush from the gate, or the horse was seen to gallop. That's passive voice, and that just kills the inner guts of good writing. The solution to cure the passive voice is this. Remember all the way back in 5th, 6th grade, and your teacher would drill into you, subject, predicate, subject, predicate. The subject is the noun at the front, and the predicate is everything that follows after it. The subject has a verb, and then comes the predicate. You could do worse than to just do this. You may say, well, it sounds kind of pedestrian, you know, it sounds sort of direct and it always starts with the. As your style, you know, you can always work your style onto your writing and improve this kind of thing. But for the sake of example, instead of saying the report was determined by the committee determined. Instead of saying we were invited by the instructor invited us. Instead of saying that the religion of the pagans, or the pagans had survived the onslaught of new ideas, put a little bit, you know, as much as you can, put an active verb up front. And you could do this sentence 6 different ways. This is just my version. But this is an interesting sentence, and you could play with it. But the key thing is, look, subject, pagans survived, Christianity displaced. Put the actor and the action as close together as you can so that we can almost see it. The longer and duller the verb, the further away you put the action from the reader, the more they feel a distance from what you're saying, a distance from your writing. All right, what about the clingy dependent clause? Once again, dependent clauses tend to be typical of pretty high-level writing, sophisticated writing. And I use dependent clauses, but I use them sparingly. All right? Dependent clauses, if you remember from your grammar classes a long time ago, dependent clauses are clauses that can't stand on their own. They're missing a subject, usually. They are tacked on, in a sense. They add description. They add more information. I couldn't write without dependent clauses. Sometimes they're very powerful. But I'll show you the problem in a moment with what's wrong with, you know, how you have to be careful about the way you use a dependent clause. This is from a good book by Kenneth Corey called The Essential Darwin. And if you don't want to read Origin of the Species, which is quite a task, you can read this book where he summarizes why was it important, how was it created. I picked it up in a college bookstore in Northampton, Massachusetts, because it looked interesting. And here's very typical of the writing in the book. It is one of the many ironies of Darwin's career that what many esteem as the centerpiece of his voluminous scholarship, on the origin of the species, he wrote in 13 months, planning it only as an introduction to some grander future exposition. Not bad. I mean, you know, a long, controlled sentence, but as I will show you, all the way up to the end of scholarship, and you could even make the argument that all the way up to the end of species, we're waiting. You know, this beginning here all hangs on, he wrote in 13 months. That's one of the traps of dependent clauses, is that they make you wait. You have to wait with a dependent clause to get to the point. And sometimes they can be quite long. You know, English begins to sound Germanic. I don't speak German, but what I understand is, any of you, are you familiar with German? The verb comes at the end. In German, you have to read the entire sentence, and the verb comes, generally I understand, last. Germanic speakers become accustomed to that. But, you know, you don't want your reader to wait and hang on, keep the thought, I'm getting there, you know, this will make sense. Now comes the predicate. Okay? Revise. Do it this way. I made it just active voice. Ironically, Darwin wrote The Origin of the Species, the centerpiece of his voluminous scholarship, in only 13 months. Break. You can usually break a clause into a new sentence. He intended it to be the introduction of some grander future work. It's not radical surgery. I didn't have to go back and, you know, play Scrabble with this paragraph. I first made it active voice, so we're not hanging on, and I broke it into 2. Another way of making us wait is tacking on clingy dependent clauses. And look at this. This is from a private family history. Now, this gentleman, when he wrote this, I got this out of a piece of research. This gentleman, when he wrote this, was 80 years old, educated at Harvard at the turn of the century. Okay? And this was considered fine writing. It has, you know, Latin sort of traits to it. The description is quite good. He's a very fine writer. But now, 100 years later, it tends to, as my father used to say, smell of the lamp. In the sense that it's written very, very late at night, you know, under a lot of duress. Here comes a big fat dependent clause. Hang on. In contrast to his father, who was conservative, retiring, and extremely modest and unassuming, okay, now we're getting to it. Albert was extroverted, flamboyant, sociable, and a big spender. Here comes another clause. Who always lived on a very lavish scale in various large houses with lots of servants, horses, and carriages, and then the earliest and finest motor cars. Here comes another dependent clause. Having at one point an English butler and a footman, he entertained his friends without thought of cost. The choicest viands, rare wines, flowers, the whitest linens, and the choicest porcelain chinaware. Here comes a dependent clause. Acquiring the reputation of a millionaire who counted the cost of nothing. Eloquent, a fine writing. A Henry Adams would have loved it. You know, but this is 2011, and this gentleman, as I say, was educated at Harvard in about 1903, okay, when it was sort of an old boys club. Revised. Let's put old Albert right up to the front, at the front, so we know who the heck we're talking about. Albert was extroverted, flamboyant, sociable, and a big spender. I inverted the order of the sentences. In contrast to his father, who was conservative, retiring, and extremely modest and unassuming. Break. That's enough. He always lived on a very lavish scale in various large houses, with lots of servants, horses and carriages, and then the earliest and finest motor car. Break. At one point, he had an English butler and a footman. He entertained his friends without thought of cost. The choicest viands, rare wines, flowers, whitest linens, and the choicest porcelain chinaware. Break. He soon acquired the reputation of a millionaire who counted the cost of nothing. I don't think that it's a lot worse in terms of writing. I don't think that we've lost any of the polish or any of the intrigue. I think, if anything, it just makes it, once again, more understandable and easier to internalize. All right, here's a tip from Virginia Woolf. Read your writing aloud. If you have to take a break before finishing the sentence is too long. If you have to take a breath, think about it. We don't speak so rapidly and in such long sentences that we have to breathe before we finish the end of the sentence. We talk only as long as our breath holds out, and then mentally bring that sentence to a close, take a breath, and start again. Only little children take a breath because what they have to say is so fascinating and so detailed that they have to say, and then we went to the movies, and then Dad got us something at the counter, and then the movie was really great, and then, you know, and it's typical of little people to do that because all they know is that words come in long strings, and as long as they don't faint talking about the movie, they'll continue to talk, taking breaths as needed. Read your writing aloud. If you have to take a breath before finishing a sentence, the sentence is too long. Virginia Woolf said, good writing sounds like good conversation. There's a mysterious thing in writing that a lot of writers try to achieve, but I'll tell you what, it's not that difficult. The most difficult thing for most writers to achieve, and the thing that they talk about a lot as an art, is achieving a sense of voice. They want the magic to happen of black marks on paper sounding like the author is talking to the reader. And that is something they really try to achieve, is this sense of voice. Okay? Washing machine manuals don't have voice. You don't expect them to. They're disembodied. They're very, very practical. But most reading, particularly engaging reading, has that mysterious quality of voice. So how do you achieve it? This is it. You make sure that what you're writing sounds like a human being speaking. I interviewed a woman for that biography of Harper Lee, and I said, and she knew Harper Lee in college. And without me asking her, she said, you know what was so remarkable about that book? And I said, no. She said, as I read it, I could just hear her talking. You know, she had a desk on the other side of the file cabinets from me in the campus newspaper office, and that book sounds just the way she talks. And that's what makes it, you know, remarkable and engaging. And Virginia Woolf, too, and so many other fine writers. Ray Bradbury. Try to get you an idea that they are actually speaking to you. All right, our second C of good writing is coherence. And you'll see some overlap with clarity. That's fine. One aids the other. Coherence is this, as a definition. Coherence is the quality of being united, forming a whole. You look at a building, you look at Jefferson's home, Monticello, you look at some of the buildings around here and you have their architecture, and all the parts play a role, and there's a totality to them architecturally. They are architecturally coherent. We even look for this when we dress in the morning. We stand in front of the mirror and we say, okay, this goes with this, and those shoes, now those shoes don't go with that. That's not the right kind of shoe for this. And you want a total look. You want coherence. And you want that in writing as well. The enemy of coherence is lack of structure. All right? You would no sooner go into your closet with the light off and feel your way through, choosing blouses, and putting them on, saying, ta-da, then you would write a piece of writing where you have no sense of the structure that's about to come, no general plan for it. You're just going to write, damn the torpedoes, let's hope it turns out. It's got to be 1,500 words, that's what she's getting. All right. All formal, well-executed writing has an identifiable structure to it. And as I say, it doesn't hit you in the forehead and you say, oh, I see what structure he's using or she's using. It's in there. It's integral. It's like rebar in concrete. You walk down the sidewalk, you don't see the rebar, but in there in the concrete is iron that's giving the concrete structure and strength. Look, novels have chapters. Chapters have 4 to 6 scenes. Count them. And each scene has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You're breezing along not noticing the structure, but if you stop and open the Da Vinci Code, you will see scenes that have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and 4 to 6 scenes make a chapter, and the chapter ends with a cliffhanger. It's not an accident. Plays have 3 acts. Essays and speeches have a clear beginning, middle, and an end. You can tell when President Obama is about to wind up. You can tell when he's developing a point. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Processes are explained step by step. You open up a cookbook, you look at the recipe. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. Do this, do this. Meanwhile, do this. Arguments have a series of supporting points. Newspaper articles go from general to specific. They start out with a broad statement, then they go to quotes, and then they wind up with the date of the next meeting or who's coming up for election. Experiments are always shown as cause and effect. Not cause first, you wouldn't know what you're looking at. Or effect first, rather. They don't show effect first, you would know what you were looking at. Technical manuals go from whole to parts or parts to whole. How many times have you bought a piece of technology or a piece of equipment and the first thing it tells you to do is, or it shows what do they call an exploded diagram. You open it up and look, you should have this cable, you should have this adapter, you should have this piece of software, you should have this DVD, but most importantly, you should have the power pack. And you look at your stuff and you say, okay, it's all there. That is a whole to parts. Okay? Let me, I'm just going to plug in my computer. It says that I'm running on reserve power. Hang on one sec. Mustn't have PowerPoint go dark on us. Okay. Speaking of whole to parts, I'm very proud of myself. This is my first PowerPoint presentation. I learned it yesterday. I spent all day up in my study. What? What? This fellow at lunch the other day says, "It'll take you 10 minutes." No. No, not 10 minutes. Okay. Let's see, we can plug this in. No, we can't do that, so let's instead over here. Let's see if we can put it here. Let's see, there's nothing there. Down here. Nope. Hang on, we will do this. We're just looking for a good power source. Right there. Well, we'll sacrifice this for a little while and do this instead. All right, now the computer's in good shape. The presentation's a little bit darker. Bear with me, okay? Can you still see that all right? Okay. All right. So the key thing to decide is, what's your identifiable structure? As long as you adhere to a structure, it will guide you like a blueprint. All pieces of writing start with, say, thesis, supporting points, summary or conclusion. First, second, third, introduction, development, end. Big, smaller, smallest. Problem, analysis, answer. Decide on the structure at the beginning. Don't let it just happen. I can remember in college the terror of writing an answer in a blue book, an essay question, and realizing, I've lost total control of this. I've been in here, I've been sitting here for 35 minutes writing like the wind, and it's not making any sense anymore. If I had just taken, 3 to 5 minutes to jot down, this is what I want to show, point 1, 2, 3, and then I'll wind up. Okay, good to go. If you would just take a little bit of time at the front end to say, what do I want to do with this? How do I want to structure it? It's similar to getting dressed. It's similar to moving furniture. Don't you visualize in your mind at home before you start moving chairs and things around? Don't you think, that will probably go over there. And then we could turn the couch. Okay? You don't just start moving things and hope that it will turn out. Oh, this looks awful. First you get an idea about what you want to do. Okay. Here's an example from the essay, New Age for Navies in the Untold Civil War. This is one of the gentlemen we're going to have as part of the Great Lives program. His name is James Robertson. He's a Civil War historian. He's going to be talking about his new book, The Untold Civil War. Watch how he goes from a broad idea to specifics and to a broad conclusion about what happened and what it meant. Maybe if I close this, you can see a little bit better. Okay? All right, the first sentence, first paragraph is very general. The first ironclads to wage war were designed and constructed for the Union in late 1861 by naval engineer James B. Eads of St. Louis. All right, that's a general remark. And then the topic sentences of the next 3 or 4 paragraphs get more and more specific. He's going from general down to more and more specifics, and then winding up with a conclusion. Okay, this guy designed the ironclads. The first battles between ironclads occurred in March 1862 in Hampton Roads on the James River, where it enters the Atlantic. Now we're down to the first battle. The opposing ironclads, now we're down to the ships, that dueled there bore little resemblance to anything ever seen afloat. Down to the ships. The day of the battle now. On March 9th, the 2 bizarre ironclads met in Hampton Roads for their historic duel. And I pulled these topic sentences off the beginning of each paragraph in a 1,500-word essay. But you can see how he's in control. All right? The final paragraph looks ahead. Big finish. Conclusion, looking to the future. The battles in Hampton Roads were heralded as the end of wooden ships and the dawn of the Iron Age in naval combat. So he had a structure in mind. He didn't assume that the reader knows anything about ironclads. Didn't assume that you know much about the Civil War. I didn't realize this battle took place so near here. I mean, here I went through high school and college and, you know, took American history. Yeah, I knew the ironclads fought, but I may go over there sometime and see exactly where that big fight took place. Okay, a tip. If your ideas are logical, this is what you should be able to do pretty easily. If your ideas are logical, then transitions should be almost automatic. Transitions are little signals to the reader of what's going to happen or what they need to note. If your writing has a structure, even if you go right from an outline to writing, you'll find that transitions come naturally. They're helping the reader. You can use transitions of addition. Also, again, as well as, besides, furthermore, you can use transitions of consequence when you're ordering your writing. Accordingly, as a result, consequently, for this reason, or direction, here, there, over there, beyond, nearly, or illustration. Some of my favorites. Whenever I'm preparing the reader to really pay attention to what I want to show them, I tend to use something like, for example, for instance, for one thing, as an illustration. Or, when you're getting near the end, signal to the reader, just about done now. Here we go, in case you didn't get it the first time. After all in all, briefly, by and large, in any case, in any event. So, if your ideas are logical, you should be able to use transitions without much problem. They'll come naturally. They're graceful. The reader appreciates transitions. Don't feel like saying first, second, third is childish. It isn't. Watch during this presidential campaign year, watch the candidate say, I have a plan with 3 steps. First, make it clear. Assume nothing. Make it easy. All right. Our third and final C of good writing is cogency. Probably not the of the 3, probably the least known word. Cogency is being, instead of an argument or a case, clear, logical, and convincing. And here you may say, wait a minute, we just talked about being clear, logical, and convincing. Well, I sort of extend the word cogency out a little bit more. I think you create cogency with energy. I think you help make yourself clear and logical by making sure that your writing has energy to it, has real moxie to it. The enemy of cogency is bloodless writing. Cogency falls away. A sense of logic and clearness falls away when writing is just as dull as white bread. Okay? And I'll show you. It takes a little effort. It takes a little effort, but here's an example. Here are symptoms of writing that is bloodless. Anemic, ordinary verbs. Going for the easiest that comes to hand. Weak, apologetic, hand-wringing phrases. These are symptoms of bloodless writing. Anemic verbs and weak apologetic phrases. Let me give you an example. Okay? Anemic verbs tend to be passive. Here it comes again. Passive voice tends to sound very anemic. I was going to explain that, in my opinion. There are 3 reasons for the slump in the housing market. The first one is a problem with consumer confidence. The second one is the stock market. The third is joblessness. There's nothing wrong with this. All right? I think, though, if you were to do a reading ease analysis of this on your computer, if you were to highlight all this and use the Flesch reading ease analysis, I'll bet this is at the 4th grade. I'll bet this is 4th grade writing. You know why? Because it is not vivid, not challenging. It all has pretty much the same, yeah, it does have all pretty much the same sentence structure except for one pause. This is okay for like a pamphlet or something, but don't think that your reader is going to be satisfied with such meager gruel for long. All right? Put energy into your writing, for heaven's sakes. We're all adults or young adults. We have this giant vocabulary. We really do. Use verbs and other parts of speech that suggest action. Don't settle for is. Don't settle for was. Don't settle for be, were, had been, have been. Come on, that's all one part of speech. How about this? I will argue the housing market collapse causes consumer confidence suffers. The sudden upswings and downswings of the stock market, the spread of joblessness that casts a chill on the real estate sales, All right? It might seem a little bit overblown, but nevertheless, as human beings, we resonate to vivid things. You know, we respond well to action and color, and words like suffers, spread, casts, chill. All right? It almost gets in the area of, you know, tactile feeling. Casts a chill over the real estate sales market, or the spread of joblessness, as if it likening it almost to a disease. And these aren't you know tough verbs. These aren't things that you can only learn after a lifetime of scholarship. Just, you know, use verbs that give your reader a sense of being along for a ride. Well, I'm sorry, this is dull. I'll read this out. Dull in the sense that it's hard to see. This is from a book called On Her Own Ground. We're having this lady come as well as part of the Great Lives series. She is the great-granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker, who was the first black entrepreneur of cosmetic procedures for black women. You know, we take it for granted now, but at the turn of the century, you know, in the 1890s, 1910, there were no hair treatments, there were no makeups, there were no perfumes for black ladies. And she took it upon herself to build an empire of cosmetics for women. And look at the great verbs here that her great-granddaughter, Ms. Bundles, is using. With her hands clasped behind her back, the only sign of her former life as a farm worker and washerwoman was the stumpy shape of her forearms, their muscles enlarged from years of twisting and squeezing soap through waterlogged sheets and tablecloths. But of course, it was her hair that she wished to emphasize. Madam Walker had pinned her now healthy tresses into a carefully coiffed crown, styled so that it gracefully swooped away from her face. Verbs of action, verbs that create a picture. Clasped, twisting, squeezing, wished, pinned, swooped away. Not is, are, be, was, were. Okay? People will say you're a good writer. When you start using verbs that are more colorful, more vivid, that create a sense of immediacy, you will start getting compliments. People will say, that was good. Because they will feel that they participated somehow. They almost saw something happening in front of them. Okay? And never be humble or apologetic. It's not a mark of good manners to be meek or prevaricating or apologetic in your opinions. Do not say, in my opinion, or I think, from my point of view, it seems to me. Don't communicate doubt, be bold. And this is a great painting. It was a little bit dimmer in here. It's by a pre-Raphaelite artist. This beautiful lady is leaning over a horse to give a kiss to a knight who's completely enraptured. He's under her control. He's under her sway. Maybe from Keats' poem, La Belle Dame Sans Merci, the woman who has no mercy. Be bold. Don't apologize. It's not even necessary to say, I think. I catch myself doing that. You know, I write and I say, well, I think. Well, obviously, I think I'm writing this. You know, I don't need to pause and tell the reader, in my opinion. Well, obviously, these are my words. This is what I think. All right? Here's somebody writing boldly. Charles M. Blow in the New York Times. Listen to this guy. Government is not the enemy. Not always. Don't believe that right-wing malarkey. In fact, for millions of Americans down on their luck and at the end of their rope, they can quickly find that government is their last friend left. Governmental assistance can prevent the certainty of a hungry night and a homeless tomorrow. It can mean the difference between the comfort of stability and the ravages of poverty. The lack of empathy for the poor and suffering on the part of the right is nothing short of breathtaking. Now, whether you agree politically with him or not, I just use this as an example of, let me show you what he's doing here. Let's break it down. Government is not always the enemy. Declarative sentence. Not always. Declarative sentence. Don't believe that right-wing malarkey. Imperative. In fact, for millions of Americans down on their luck, etc., etc., here's a real great, strong, parallel, alliterative phrase. The certainty of a hungry night and a homeless tomorrow. This guy sounds like he's running for president. This is great stuff. A hungry night and a homeless tomorrow. 2 chickens in every pot. It can mean the difference between the comfort of stability, and the ravages of poverty. Comfort versus ravages. Good contrast. The lack of empathy for the poor and suffering on the part of the right is nothing short of breathtaking. He didn't choose an easy-to-hand word like, it's wrong. He didn't choose an easy word like, it's foolish. He said it's breathtaking. So another way to vivify your writing is not only to go for those words that create a tactile sense, those verbs that create energy and are vivid, but also not to go for the first word that comes to hand, but think, how can I make that a little bit more powerful? That's the easy word. Wrong. I'll go for breathtaking. By being direct and plain spoken, you make your meaning clear. Okay, where can you get more information on what I've been talking about? You should avail yourself of the Writing Center. This is the website for the Writing Center here at UMW. They've got exercises for practice. They've got MLA and APA and Turabian guides. They have examples of various kinds of writing in different disciplines: literature, biology, psychology. They have handouts on grammar, publication, and organization. And this is really an opportunity for you. Writing centers, some of you are old enough to remember that there was no such thing as writing centers back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. It's a relatively new asset on campuses, a place to drop in if you're having trouble writing and say, what's wrong with this? Why isn't this working? Or, I got this back and I didn't get a very good grade. Help me on this. So take advantage of the Writing Center and what it can do for you. Now, how about some questions? Let me turn up the lights a little bit. Okay, let's see, how does this work? Does that do it? Yes. Wow, this is my week to be technological. Okay, what questions can I answer for you? Yes, Gwen.
One of the things I know with my students, they get what I call thesaurus-itis, and they try to avoid those, weak, anemic verbs.
Yes.
But then they become overwrought. Do you find that that's sort of the thing with the pendulum, that eventually it'll reach sort of an equilibrium, that people go from one extreme to the other? Or do you have more advice on that?
Well, it is a matter of practice, but it doesn't have to be. Okay? Through School of Hard Knocks, you will learn that if you start throwing in $10 words where $1 words will do, you'll find that people don't understand you. They might be impressed by your intelligence or your vocabulary, but ultimately they don't understand you. So rather than learn that over the course of years, you can help them cut to the chase by using this simple rule. Does that word help you be better understood? That's the litmus test right there. By using phlegmatic instead of sluggish, which is a synonym, will most of your readers get phlegmatic? Will they understand the word phlegmatic, or will they think that you're talking about hydraulics when it actually means sluggish? So The only test is, will that choice of words help you be better understood? That's all that matters. Other questions? Yes.
Would it be possible to go back to that slide with the transition words?
Oh, the transition words? Oh, sure, yeah. Hang on, gotta be patient.
Yeah, I got the first three too. So.
Yes.
And also, just as an aside, not to be self-promoting,
Yes.
but if you all want a list of transition words, we do have those in the writing center.
Great.
Yeah, how about that?
And if you'd like, you can send me your PowerPoint, I can put it on the writing center's website.
I'll do it. I'll send the PowerPoint, and you can, rather than go on a date, watch this PowerPoint. Oh, I don't need to go out to dinner. I got to watch Shield's PowerPoint. Other questions?
Just in general, I mean, fiction versus nonfiction.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how much experience you have personally with fiction, having done a biography.
I wrote for True Romance magazine.
Well, there you go.
One set of words.
There are, any different emphases among these points that you raise? I mean, you always want to be clear and cogent and concise, but obviously depending on, if you're writing for True Romance or something, you're trying to be as dramatic or as, off the wall as possible in some ways, but still wanting to be understood or, clear and, about what you're getting at.
You know what controls what has to control the tone in your writing, or controls what you're going for? It's the audience. All right, that's what really matters. I mean, when I wrote a story for True Romance magazine called Diet of Death, about a little girl who was getting back at her mother by refusing to eat because she wouldn't let her date. I studied the magazine and I realized these readers want to get in fast, they want melodrama, and they want it to be about love or relationships. So that's what I wrote to. But I would never write to a colleague, in that tone. So what really controls the whole tone that you take and the style of the writing is, who's going to read this? Who's going to read this? Stephen King wrote a book about his writing, about how he writes. It's nothing like his fiction. When King is explaining how he goes about it as a writer and how when he was a boy he ran off a mimeographed horror magazine in his basement, he's talking to you because you want to learn how to write like him, so he's telling you. But it's way different from Cujo. It's way different from, Bag of Bones. So it depends on the audience. Okay? You think about who's on the other side. Here's just one more example. I taught high school for a long time. And when I left high school teaching to start writing full-time, the first thing I did was, first series of jobs I got, was writing short biographies and histories for young people in grades 9 through 12. I wrote a biography of Amy Tan. I wrote one of Martha Stewart. I wrote one of Spike Lee and George Lucas. And the whole time I was writing them, I pretended that a class of 9th graders was in my study with me, and I was explaining this to them. So if the sentence was getting a tad too long, stop. If they weren't going to get enough information from this because they aren't familiar with this, a little more explanation. But them being my imaginary audience did a lot to help me write those books and get them out there. I wrote 20 histories and biographies for young people, all 20,000 words each. They're in school libraries now. So that was my key. Who's the audience? Other questions?
As far as injecting the energy into your writing, with vocabulary, and I know that sentence structure, well, as you said, has a lot to do with that. Are you a proponent of having, they say some of the best writing is plagiarized in a way that you get style from other people. Are you a proponent of that, or did you just write out on your own?
It's a good way to learn, particularly when you're starting out. or whether you want to learn a craft. Let's say that you are middle-aged and you've always wanted to write a novel. Study the novels that you'd like to, the kind of novel that you'd like to write. You want to write horror? Read all the horror you can. You want to write detective stories and mysteries? Go to school on them. Read Agatha Christie, you know? So yes, starting out as an emulator is a good thing. I was listening to the poet Billy Collins the other day being interviewed by Terry Gross on NPR. If I'm not mistaken, I think Billy Collins might have been poet laureate for a little while, I'm not sure. But in any event, he said, you know, when I first started out, he said, what I was pretty much doing was writing very bad Farrell and Getty and Allen Ginsberg. He said, you know, I admired the heck out of them. I wanted to be like them. So I wrote poems that were very similar to what they were already doing. And he said, and it was a while before I realized what they were talking about was not what I wanted to talk about. I was just doing a pretty good imitation, or I was channeling Allen Ginsberg. So you start off in imitation, and then eventually you hit your stride. Anything else? Well, you've been great. Thank you very much for being so attentive.